how do we actually share data in a way that it's conducive to science, that's conducive to leveraging the data, and also is conducive to reproducible science, because that's embedded in the nature of sharing data. So the first question I'd kind of like to pose, jumping right into the challenges, maybe starting with Sheenah, is, what do you see as the major challenges for, let's start with individual researchers and sharing data?
So I've been doing this for a long time, right? And I see the newer generation of scientists who are much more willing to share data. So what I would have to say then is that it really has to do with training and outcomes, because they do see the benefit of sharing data, they do see the benefit of collaboration, and they don't have such a strong sense of ownership. So I think that's what we really have to work on. We have to work on training, we have to work on outcomes, and we have to work on credit, giving the data team, if you will, full credit, because every part of it is a contributing member of the outcomes.
Yeah, and you mentioned provenance in your presentation, and this is critical. And this is combined, very much of a technological issue on how we ensure that the original source of the data and how the data is used through its life cycle is recorded. So we have that provenance, and so there can also be recognition, because obviously recognition is a driver of incentives for actually doing the right thing and helping us along. And also those younger scientists, of course, tend to be, I can tell you, being an older scientist, are much more capable, not only willing to absorb new technologies and put them in practice, but also capable of doing so. And so I think that's also a key to it. Thanks very much. Christy, what are your thoughts?
Sure. So there are always lots of challenges, but I do think that those also result in opportunities for improving the way that we do things. So anytime there's a workplace challenge, I think it's a special motivator to make things work better. So I think trying to establish more friction-free workflows for investigators to be able to be compliant with data sharing. Investigators at all levels and in all roles, everyone is busy, and so how can we automate processes to be able to leverage standard workflows, standard data, standard processes more generally, so that when we're asking a human to plug in on an activity, it's something that can't be pulled from something else. So those are areas that I'm especially interested in. I also want to point out, the conversation around contributorship, excuse me, more generally, is one that's very important, I think, because when we do think about that, the range of roles and responsibilities that are necessary to drive science, it isn't just the author byline. It requires a wide range of people. And so I am going to give a shout out. The Force 11 community has an attribution working group, and I have been actively involved with that for a long time. And there's been some interesting commentaries around contributorship, particularly I think around of course, we're all familiar with credit, but there are opportunities for that to evolve as well. And I will also give a small shout out to Mohammed Hosseini, who is a postdoc in my group, and he's been doing some really wonderful work with ethics of contributor roles, which has been enlightening to think about fairness and credit overall. So thank you.
One of the things about what you just said about, how do you create these workflows for getting data into repositories, for example, which can be quite challenging, I can tell you, is interesting. And what often happens is, that happens often at the very end of a project, right? You've got to respond to some requirement to get published or to get your annual report in, or whatever it is you need to do. And more and more, I'm starting to realize, and we're realizing in my role as in CyVerse for many years, was this is a lot like statistics, in where we bring in in the best case, we bring in statistical help at the beginning of the project, right? We don't wait till the end or you've got no project, right? You've screwed it up. So it's the same thing here, starting with a framework within a laboratory to be able to pursue data science properly and set things up at the beginning creates that flow that makes it much easier at the end. And I think that's one of our training challenges, is how do we make labs data competent and have the tools and the resources and the knowledge within the laboratory to start and handle data from the very beginning, so that all of that pipeline and the life cycle of that data moves through appropriately. So I don't know what you think of that and how that can happen. And this gets us into the notion of training, right? And how we set up training to be able to do that.
If I could also weigh in, I mean, we're thinking about this, like, how do we bake this in, so that it becomes part of the way we do work, rather than something that's reactive and stressful, and like something that's done like much later in the evening than it should be done, those kinds of things. And so, we've been really fortunate, I think, at Feinberg to have a community and leadership that really embrace the library. And I can't more strongly encourage folks who are going to hear this message to reach out to your local library on campus. And if you have questions about data sharing, research data management plans, what kind of training might be available, I would bet you might be surprised at how advanced work is at the library. This is we talk about infrastructure resources. The library is right there with the other kinds of infrastructure resources, ready and excited to partner with investigators to champion work forward. So I will stop there, but I do encourage you to reach out to your library team.
Yeah, it reminds me of what was the sort of the jingle? It's the latest, it's the greatest, it's the library, right?
Yes.
And it's really true in data science now, absolutely.
The other thing that I wanted to mention, just based on conversations that we've had, at different institutions that I've been at, with respect to the core facilities, I mean, the work that's happening in core research facilities is outstanding. And it is an engine, that really keeps things moving forward. But when you're trying to figure out what data or what results or what impact, how many papers, how many subsequent grants are tied to that work that is like so critical, it's really hard to make those connections. And so I think there's even best practices with as simple as, like, how are we citing our colleagues and the facilities on campus? What are the unique identifiers that we can use to knit together the story and tell it to the decision makers on campus? So, I don't want to go down, I could be in this rabbit hole for a while, but it's all about these, how do you leverage those standards? We all need them for different reasons.